Use your mind control power.
They've stolen it!
Now I'll control their minds.
And my magical power will shape the earth.
Visionaries, knights of the magical light.
How did a toy line built around holograms, magic, and futuristic knights become one of the most ambitious ideas of the 1980s and then disappear almost immediately? Now, in the mid-1980s, the toy industry was dominated by giants. You had He-Man, Transformers, and G.I. Joe, and they weren't just toys anymore, they were multimedia empires. Kids didn't just buy the figures, they watched the cartoons, collected the comics, and memorized entire worlds built around them. Every toy company wanted the next massive franchise that could dominate store shelves and television screens at the same time. And in 1987, Hasbro believed they had created exactly that. Now, the line was called Visionaries, Knights of the Magical Light, and at first glance, it seemed almost perfect. It combined fantasy and science fiction into one world filled with armored knights, magical powers, and holograms that looked futuristic even by 1980s standards. And the toys had incredible designs. The cartoon was surprisingly ambitious, and the entire concept just felt bigger and smarter than many of the franchises competing at the time. And yet, within barely a year, it was over. The toys just disappeared. The cartoon ended. And one of the most creative toy lines of the decade became a little more than a forgotten memory. So what happened? Well, to understand the rise of Visionaries, it helps to understand the toy landscape of the 1980s. This was the era when cartoons and toy lines became completely connected. Successful brands weren't just selling action figures anymore, they were selling entire universes. And Hasbro already dominated the market with Transformers and G.I. Joe, but the company wanted another major franchise, something a little different, something that could stand out in an increasingly crowded toy aisle. And that desire led to one of the most unusual concepts of the decade. The world of Visionaries took place on the planet Prismos, a civilization built entirely around advanced technology. But everything changed when the planet's 3 suns aligned, causing all technology to stop working instantly. Machines failed, electronics died, civilization collapsed almost overnight. And into that chaos came magic. A mysterious wizard named Merklin appeared and offered powerful magical abilities to warriors brave enough to survive his trials. And those warriors split into 2 opposing factions: the heroic Spectral Knights, led by Lyric, and the villainous Darkling Lords, led by Darkstorm. And right away, the setup felt more sophisticated than many competing toy lines. Instead of simple good versus evil battles, the series explored a world forced to adapt after losing the technology it depended on. And then, of course, there were the powers. Now, each knight received a magical totem connected to an animal spirit. Lyric possessed the power of the lion, Whittaquick had the cheetah, Darkstorm carried the symbol of the mollusk. And these symbols weren't just decorations, they represented the characters' identities and magical transformations. Every knight also wielded a unique magical staff with its own abilities. Some could reveal secrets, others could destroy objects, manipulate time, or weaken enemies instantly. The world building was, to say the least, ambitious. But what truly made Visionaries stand out was the holograms. You see, embedded directly into the chest armor and staffs of the action figures were shimmering holographic images unlike anything most kids had ever seen before. When tilted in the light, the holograms seemed to move and transform. Animal spirits appeared alive inside the figures. Now, for kids in 1987, this felt futuristic. The toys looked magical, and Hasbro fully committed to the launch. A 13-episode animated series was produced by Sunbow Productions, the same company responsible for Transformers and G.I. Joe. Marvel Star Comics also released a companion comic series to expand the mythology further. Everything was in place. The toys looked incredible, the world felt unique, and the holograms gave the line an identity no competitor could copy easily. For a brief moment, it seemed like Hasbro had created another hit. But underneath the surface, major problems were already forming. Now, the biggest issue was also the thing that made Visionaries special in the first place. You see, the holograms were expensive. Producing those detailed holographic effects cost significantly more than manufacturing standard action figures, and that meant Visionaries figures ended up costing more than many competing toys on shelves. And while the hologram looked impressive, they didn't actually add much to the play experience itself. Kids could transform Optimus Prime. They could load weapons into G.I. Joe vehicles, but the holograms were mostly just visual. Of course, they were cool to look at, but once the novelty faded, there wasn't much interaction beyond that. And for parents comparing prices in toy aisles, that really mattered. And then there was the competition. The toy industry in 1987 was brutally crowded. Transformers and G.I. Joe were already dominating. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles were about to explode into one of the biggest crazes of the entire decade, and countless companies were fighting for shelf space at the same time. And even another hologram-based line called Supernaturals launched around the same period, meaning Visionaries didn't even fully own the hologram gimmick. The market was just overloaded, and Visionaries needed massive success to survive. Unfortunately, another major problem quickly became obvious. The cartoon was too short, and unlike franchises with years of television exposure, Visionaries only received 13 episodes, and that simply wasn't enough time to build the deep audience connection needed to support a major toy line. And the show itself was surprisingly ambitious for children's television. Instead of simple action stories, many episodes focused on political conflict, moral dilemmas, and philosophical themes. For older viewers, that complexity became part of the appeal years later, but for younger audiences at the time, it may have been harder to connect with immediately compared to simpler, more action-driven cartoons. As sales slowed, Hasbro made a decision quickly. The line was failing, and in the toy industry, failure moves fast. Plans for a second wave of figures were cancelled before reaching stores. New characters, new vehicles, and a massive Iron Mountain playset were scrapped completely. Even female knights planned for future releases never officially made it to retail shelves. The cartoon ended abruptly after its first season. The comic series was cancelled after only 6 issues, and just like that, Visionaries disappeared. What was supposed to become Hasbro's next giant franchise lasted barely more than a year. But strangely, that wasn't the end of the story. Because over time, Visionaries developed something many failed toy lines never achieve: a cult following. You see, for kids who discovered the toys and cartoon during that brief window, the franchise left a lasting impression. The holograms felt unlike anything else from the era. The combination of science fiction and fantasy stood out, and the darker, more thoughtful storytelling gave the series an identity that separated it from many competitors. So, as the years passed, collectors started hunting for original figures. The same holograms that once drove up production costs became one of the line's most valuable features. Mint condition figures became highly sought-after collector's items, and the concept itself aged surprisingly well. A world where advanced technology suddenly fails and society turns back toward magic feels even more relevant now than it did in 1987. That core idea gave Visionaries a timeless quality many forgotten toy lines lacked, and eventually, Hasbro noticed that lasting interest. The characters returned through comic crossovers and shared universes, even including Transformers vs. Visionaries from IDW Publishing. Even decades later, the company recognized there was still something powerful about the franchise. Because despite failing commercially, Visionaries succeeded creatively. And sometimes that matters just as much. So what caused the rise and fall of Visionaries, Knights of the Magical Light? Well, the rise came from incredible ambition, unique world-building, and groundbreaking hologram technology that made the toys feel futuristic and magical at the same time. But the fall came from high production costs, overwhelming competition, and a short-lived cartoon that never had enough time to build a large audience. But the legacy survived, because Visionaries represented something rare in the toy industry. It took risks, it tried something different, and even though it failed, it left behind a world people still remember decades later.